I'm Jason UFC, and today we have a story about Brendan Schaub names the two most disrespected fighters in the UFC. Brendan Schaub revealed who he believes are the two most disrespected athletes in the UFC. Brendan Schaub doesn't think two high-level UFC fighters are getting their due, or as you kids would say, their flowers. Schaub has never been one to hide his feelings on how fighters are treated both by fans and promoters. The former UFC heavyweight Brendan Schaub has once again spoken out, this time expressing his belief that one current world champion and one top ranked contender have been underappreciated. During an episode of The Schaub Show, Schaub had UFC play-by-play commentator John Anik and former UFC title contender Kenny Florian as guests. Schaub shared that he didn't like seeing fans harp on Gilbert Burns' shoulder injury and the loss to Bilal Muhammad at UFC 288. He ultimately believed Bilal Muhammad and UFC bantamweight champion Aljamain Sterling are the two most disrespected fighters in the UFC. The thing that bothers me about the narrative is, oh, Gilbert was hurt. It's like Bilal had nothing to do with that, Schaub said. So I think he's the most underappreciated guy we have in the UFC. And I think even if he went in there and got a 30-second knockout, he still wouldn't have got his credit. Him and Aljamain Sterling are the most disrespected guys in the UFC, which I don't understand because it's two of the greatest guys you will ever meet. They're just solid people. Aljamain Sterling is coming off of a split decision victory over Henry Cejudo to successfully retain his 135-pound bantamweight championship. Aljamain Sterling is expected to face Sean O'Malley next, potentially in August in Boston. As for Bilal, remember the name, Muhammad, UFC President Dana White has said that Bilal Muhammad will challenge the winner of a planned non-announced fight yet between UFC welterweight champion Leon Edwards and UFC number one welterweight contender Kobe Chaos Covington for the UFC championship. Yeah, I mean, this is a tough one because I don't really know who is Schaub referring to as far as being underappreciated. Is he saying that the fans are underappreciating these two fighters, or is he saying the UFC is underappreciating these two fighters? Like, if we just want to go down both theories, real quick, I would disagree. That the UFC has underappreciated Aljamain Sterling. Aljamain Sterling got the fight versus Piotr Jan. Aljamain Sterling got the fight versus TJ Dillashaw, who's a headliner. Aljamain Sterling got the fight versus Henry Cejudo, headliner. So they've been giving, Aljamain Sterling headlining fights, pay-per-view fights. So I don't think the UFC is underappreciating Aljamain Sterling. And with Bilal Muhammad, he's the number 2 contender in the welterweight division. So I don't feel like he's underappreciated. He's had some main event fights. He's had some good fights versus Vicente Luque. He actually fought Leon Edwards. I believe that fight was recent, like when he got poked in the eye, Bilal Muhammad versus Leon Edwards. So, I mean, Bilal Muhammad has been getting really good high-level fights in the UFC. So I don't think the UFC is what Brendan Schaub was talking about, because he said he's harped on the Gilbert Burns injury. The one thing I would say about the Gilbert Burns injury is that, to Schaub, that, Gilbert Burns, this was going to be his 3rd fight this year. So anyone, no matter what, if you knock out a guy that's already had 3 fights this year, it's going to be really hard to get your flowers, right? Like if Bilal Muhammad went in there in 30 seconds, knocked out Gilbert Burns, all of the fans would obviously say, yeah, of course he got knocked out. He had to cut weight in January. He had to cut weight in April last month to fight Jorge Masvidal. So Gilbert Burns isn't the same fighter that he would have been if he didn't fight 3 times this year, right? So it's going to be really difficult to give someone flowers for beating someone whose body is already beat up, right? But Bilal Muhammad, like I said, the UFC has him as the number 2 contender, basically the number 1 contender, right, at this point. He could probably weigh in for that title fight versus Kobe Covington and Leon Edwards. If anything happens there, Bilal Muhammad steps in for that fight. So Bilal Muhammad gets his flowers. He'll be fine. I think Aljamain Sterling gets his flowers from the UFC. Really, really high profile championship headline fights against Piotr Yan, Henry Cejudo. He's gonna be fighting Sean O'Malley next, the Sugar Sean show, so that should be good. But as far as the fans, now listen, sports are sports. This is not the WWE. We cannot tell who fans can cheer and who they can boo. You hear this all the time. People get in their feelings when the fans boo the home team and think that the fans shouldn't boo. Like, listen, if fans want to boo the home team, the fans going to boo the home team. Like, I don't know what Aljamain Sterling or Bilal Muhammad could do to specifically get the fans on their side, but we've seen in the UFC that fighters with losses, get cheered sometimes, right? So it's not like if you're 9-0, like this is like the WWE and they got to cheer for you or something in your face, right? Like if you're 9-0 and people still aren't cheering for you, I have no idea what to do, right? That's MMA, that's UFC fan base. It's not always just, necessarily cheering for the winners, and there's other ways to get over in the sport. Finishes, your personality, call outs, how you move, the type of finishes, how aggressive you are in the cage. Those are things that really get you over with the MMA crowd. I just don't think just being on like a 9-fight win streak means that you're underappreciated because the fans aren't, really cheering for your next fight. If, 9 fights in a row of decisions, right? Like a lot of people, I saw Anthony Smith, got people were talking about him retiring and that Johnny Walker's performance wasn't so great because he didn't finish Anthony Smith, right? Like, so it's just like you could win a fight, but if sometimes some MMA fighters well, if you, win 2 fights in a row, they want finishes, they want blood, right? Some fans want blood. Some promoters want blood, right? Some promoters, if you have 9-fight win streak and it's all decisions, they're not too crazy about your performance, right? So I don't know. And in my opinion, my MMA casual opinion, as far as who's the most underappreciated fighter in the UFC, as far as champion, I would say Amanda Nunes, right? I just love Amanda Nunes. I'm a bigger fan. But as far as champions, as far as being underappreciated, I can't really say that any of them are. Maybe John Jones, if you think about it, maybe he's underappreciated. We could probably look back on John Jones' reign and say, well, my God, that guy was unbeatable. So, John Jones or Amanda Nunes, but those two are GOATs. So in my opinion, that's why they're underappreciated. But as far as underappreciated fighter that's just under the radar, I would say Shavkat Rakhmonov. That's someone who I think people really have to start paying attention to. He's 17-0 in the welterweight division. He has finished all of his fights, right? None of his fights has gone to a decision, either submission or TKO/KO. So Shavkat Rakhmonov, to me, would be the most underappreciated fighter in the UFC welterweight division. You have not heard a single welterweight say Shavkat Rakhmonov's name. He's currently ranked number 6 in the welterweight division. So someone's going to have to fight him sooner than later. So those would be my picks. I would say John Jones, Amanda Nunes, and Shavkat Rakhmonov. But like I said, I don't know the criteria. I don't know if Brendan Schaub is saying that Bilal Muhammad and Aljamain Sterling are underappreciated by the UFC or underappreciated by the UFC fans. But let me know your opinion of this story. Even if you don't have an opinion of this story, who do you think are the most underappreciated fighters in the UFC? My picks would be Jones, Nunes, Shavkat. I'm Jason, UFC. Today we had a story about Brendan Schaub names the two fighters he believed are the most disrespected fighters in the UFC. Aljamain Sterling, bantamweight champion, and welterweight Bilal Muhammad. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the $1 donation button. And please tune in to the next video on this channel. Thanks a million for watching.